Before starting to mix a track, I think it's essential to organize the project in a way that's meaningful, not only to you, but also in a way where others can look at it and make sense of it in a glance. Also, the setup process is going to make the mixing process easier overall. That's what I'm going to cover in this video. It's sort of like cleaning out your car before going on a long road trip. It just makes the whole experience more relaxed and pleasant. I'm going to start by using the Save As feature to save this project under a new name, so I'll always have the original in case I need to go back and reference it. This is what the project looked like when I got it from Scott. Having worked with a lot of his projects, I can attest he's organized and consistent in terms of how he lays them out, and that definitely makes them easier for me to work with. The first thing I'm going to do is switch over the inputs and outputs. As will most likely be the case anytime you're working in your own studio on someone else's project, as your setup probably isn't going to be the same as the person's from whom you got the project. For example, Scott uses the Apogee Symphony, whereas I'm using the Universal Audio Apollo. In Cubase, this is done in the VST Connections window, which is default key command F4. Tabbing through the various screens, you can see many of the ins and outs don't translate. I have my setup for the various tabs saved as presets, so I'm simply going to recall them. Now, all the ins and outs are based on my system rather than his, and you can see that displayed on the left and the right sides of my mix console. Next, I'm going to go through and assign colors to the tracks. This makes it so I can easily tell what kind of instrument a track is at a quick glance. As is, the project is using Cubase's default color palette. I'm going to recall my own, where I have groups of colors that represent different instruments with 5 colors apiece. To recall one of your own presets, select Project Colors, Options, and Load Program Defaults to Current Set. This recalls my colors and labels them for me. The lighter blues represent the drum and bass tracks. The darker blues represent MIDI and virtual instruments. The greens represent guitar tracks. The purples represent vocal tracks. And I have 2 more families, orange and brighter green, that can be used for auxiliary purposes. You can create your own color palette by simply selecting a color and then labeling it. And you can add and remove colors endlessly. I mostly work with pop and rock tracks, so this layout has served me well. Obviously, you can contour the scheme to your specific needs. So with my color palette instantiated, now I'm going to go through and color all the tracks accordingly. First, the drums are light blue. I selected a light color as it makes it easier to see the sharp transients. Next is the percussion folder. I want to differentiate them from the drums, so because the song only has 1 bass track, I'll borrow one of the bass colors. This keeps the colors in my drum and bass family. Now, in opening the keys folder, you can see there are 3 tracks. I generally like to order them by entrance time, so I'm going to move the Whirly to the top and the Leslie to the bottom. Then I'll use my MIDI colors for these. The orchestra folder has 3 tracks. I'm going to continue where I left off with my MIDI colors here. When I run out of colors, I simply loop back to the first color in the family. Next is the guitar folder. There are 6 tracks in here. At a quick glance, I can see that the second and third guitar tracks for the most part play at the same time, and by looking at Scott's pan positions, he has them juxtaposed from one another, so I'm going to use the same color for them. This helps me see that they're related and should be treated similarly. The harmony folder has 6 tracks. Here, they seem to be in pairs, so I'm going to color them as such. Again, so I can see at a quick glance that they're related. I'm going to start with my second vocal color to leave the first color for the lead vocal track. Then the bass track, I'm going to assign to the bass 1 color and the lead vocal track to the vocal 1 color. Having assigned all the tracks colors that are meaningful to me, now I'm going to put them in the order I like to use. And this order seems to be somewhat universal. First, the drums, then the percussion, and those are already in place. After that, the bass guitar, which I'll have to move up from the bottom. Then the MIDI tracks, where here are the keys and orchestra tracks. Then the guitars, then the lead vocal, and finally the harmony tracks. I'm going to open up the group tracks folder and make it so they reflect this same order. And I'll talk more about the group tracks shortly. I'm going to be building this mix from scratch, so I'm going to remove all the effects tracks, which is Cubase's name for the send effects tracks. Then I'm going to go to the visibility tab and hide the group tracks. The only time I need to see these tracks is if I'm working with automation, which, if at all, will be near the end of the mixing process. Now, before I move on to the mix console, I noticed in taking a look at a few of the tracks, I can see some of them have large amounts of silence, specifically the main vocal track and the harmony tracks. I'm going to clean them up using the detect silence function. This can be helpful when working on a project with a lot of tracks and when the project uses high sample and bit rates, as it lessens the amount of information your computer needs to read from the hard drive. First, I'll select them all. After selecting all the events for the harmony tracks, I hold Shift and then select the events for the main vocal track. Then, under the audio menu up top, I'm going to go to Advanced and then select Detect Silence. I use this function a lot, so I've assigned a key command to it. What's important here is you set the threshold low enough that it's only eliminating the silence. After it automatically detects the region, select Process. It will then move on to the next region, and you'll just continue doing this until all the regions have been cleaned up. Having everything organized and cleaned up in the project window, I'm now going to move on to the mix console. Scott used a bunch of plugins throughout, some of which I don't have. The missing plugins are identified with 3 exclamation points preceding their names. I want to start with a clean slate anyway, so I'm going to zero out the board, meaning I'm going to reset all the faders to 0, pan positions to center, routing, and remove all the plugins. You can do this in Cubase by clicking on the drop-down arrow in the top right of the mix console and selecting Reset Mix Console Channels. It then asks if I want to reset just the selected channel or if I want to reset all of them. I'm going to reset all. Instantly, everything is zeroed out. Finally, I'm going to adjust some of the visibility settings in the mix console. I've assigned a key command to this function as I use it somewhat frequently, but you can access this area by clicking on the button in the top left of the mix console and checking the box next to Channel Selector. First, I'm going to hide all my inputs since I'm not going to be recording anything. I'm also going to hide my DI to Axe Effects output as I'm not going to be doing any reamping here either. Then, I'm going to switch to the Zones tab and push all the group tracks and the stereo out to the right. Beyond moving these channels to the right, it also makes it so these tracks always stay in view. I find this feature especially useful when working on projects that have a lot of tracks, like this one. After that, I'm going to close the channel selector window and then narrow all the tracks so I can see as many as possible. The last thing I'm going to do in terms of setup in the mix console is take care of the routing. Scott had all the tracks routed to their respective groups, but this was undone when I reset the mix console channels. If you haven't done so, create group channels for all your tracks so every single track is being sent to a group. Yes, even if, as with the bass guitar in this project, that means a single track is being routed to a bus. Sending all the tracks to group tracks or bus tracks like this allows for quick and easy submixing. Say, for example, the mix sounds pretty good as is, but the drums need to be a bit louder. Rather than adjusting all 19 drum tracks, I can simply grab the drum group and push its fader up. It's a massive time saver. To do this, first, make sure routing is selected in the Racks menu. Then, select the first of the desired channels, here the kick track, hold Shift, and then click on the last track, which here is Ambient Far. Now, all the channels to be sent to the drum group are selected. Next, open up the routing section of the mix console, hold Option Shift or Alt Shift if you're on a PC, and click where it says Stereo Out. Then, when the menu comes up, select Drum Group under Groups. You'll notice this changes all the channels at once. Now, I'm going to go through and do the same for the rest of the channels. I don't need to see the routing anymore, so I'm going to open up the racks in the mix console and deselect it. In fact, I'm going to make it so the only things that I do see are the inserts and the sends. As a final step, I'm going to set the project settings. Before I open that window though, I need to know how long the project is. Moving the playhead to the very end of the project, I can see it's right around 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Now, I'll open up the project setup window, which is default key command Shift S. From here, I'm going to put in the artist's name, which is Martha Berner, and the significant others under author. And then I'm going to put the name of Scott Studio under company, which is Stranded on a Planet. Then I'll adjust the length to 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The rest is fine. All right, having set up the ins and outs, organized and cleaned up the project window and mix console, and reset all the channels, I'm ready to start mixing.